trading app. You can buy, sell, and trade national and international currencies instantly. Sign up for Zoja today using code RickyRicky and pay no fees for the first 3 months. Zoja, trade the world.
It's cool, you know. We're called Sticks and Stones. I play bass. Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Didn't know that. Well, we're back and we're talking about reuse and carbon monuments. Let's discuss this proposed self cooling tower project here at RFU. Allegra, where are you at on this?
I'm not a fan, Ricky. I mean, these buildings, these infrastructures have really complex histories. You know, the Great Exchange was not given in the
Sticks and
20s.
stones
Coal
down
fired
deep.
power plants dropped offline quickly, and those communities were reeling for some time. It's not only about what the South Cooling Tower has become to mean for students today, but how these spaces acted as points of collective action in that late carbon era.
Hey, there's actually a great recording online from 27 or so by Shambo. Before he helped found RFU, he was really one of the important early
One
voices
world big
advocating for policy
coincidence.
that materially addressed the climate of the time.
The burden of climate disaster is not shared equally. The designs of policies past and present manifest racial, class, and nation based inequalities that leave specific communities particularly susceptible to crises. While progressive energy policy is critical to maintaining tolerable environmental conditions, its immediate meaning for many communities is loss. Loss of a paycheck, loss of neighbors, loss of school funding. In regions dependent on traditional energy economy, a plant closure might appear to be a quicker end than rising temperatures. Unable or unwilling to simultaneously recognize the concerns that brought us here and those that keep us stuck, our factional approach to politics blinds us to the planetary wrath which we have in common. The past 30 years have illustrated how flourishing politics of division amongst a broad range of constituents has reduced climate related policy and regulation to a partisan initiative. Especially in the world of slim majorities, and in a country as vast as the United States, the seeds of division are sowed and nurtured in a system where certain constituents are episodically written off by executive action. And as we have seen countless times before, although a president's signature enacts or retracts policy, it is the written off who moves their hand. A lasting and effective addressal of these obstacles won't result from executive order or singular legislation. It requires sustained support, sustained concern for communities outside of our own, and serious efforts to clarify the project, to represent it clearly. The Green New Deal is more inclusive than a simple partisan energy policy. It proposes programs for housing, healthcare, and free education, as well as the protection and inclusion of frontline and vulnerable communities. In these stipulations, the Green New Deal has the capacity to ameliorate historical injustices and change the political climate that has so far stymied its fruition. The United States is home to many thousands of towns and cities deeply tied to the fossil fuel industry, each with their own communities whose livelihood is fundamentally linked to these spaces of energy production. But the fossil fuel age is ending, as it must. For the past decade, increased regulatory costs and the plummeting price of renewable sources are proving traditional plants untenable. The United States has a long and devastating history of erasure, razing, and displacement. Settler colonial initiatives stripped Native American land and bodies from their homes. Long before any coal plants or cooling towers, groups of Shawnee and Algonquin tribes called the Ohio River their home. In the 20th century, this process took on a particularly architectural image as support systems, Economies and livelihoods were raised to make way for the buildings that promised to ameliorate the ailments that were perceived to plague these communities. The fresh arrivals did not keep their promise, and promptly, within the span of a mere few decades, destroyed to replace. With an almost prophetic sense of irony, the next generation of mixed use, mixed income, prosthetically sensitive saviors being erected today are attempting to produce the complex and far reaching sense of community and interconnectedness that their predecessors snuffed out to justify their existence. The fossil fuel communities in this country have an embedded connective tissue that runs from places of production to nearby towns, from towns to regions, and from regions to the entire country and beyond. To bulldoze these networks, relocate communities, and imagine a clean slate approach to these areas would not only necessitate a blatant disregard for the agency and opinion of these constituents, already buoyed by top down corporate structures of industry, but would be learning nothing from the repeated mistakes of our history. The architectural import and totemic quality of these complexes is multiple and demands artifactual care. Their landscapes, though abused, are not beyond remediation. Connections to towns and each other via rail and river are powerful assets that previously moved minerals, but could instead mobilize a rededicated workforce. The potential of these sites of production now lies in generation of a different kind. The Green New Deal is really a misnomer. While the name might suggest a myopic New Deal focused on emissions without regard for these constituents, its approach to sustainability is societal. A focus on and a clear articulation of the agency that a proposal of this nature could give and must give to those who are systematically written off in the conversation is fundamentally key to achieving any kind of lasting climate change initiative. Providing an image of what a Green New Deal could look like for those who have rightful fears of its implementation is how we can shrink the broadening division that stifles progress toward a future that is necessary for all.
Energy infrastructures have a turbulent history. They were once marveled as these generators of prosperity, bringing light and power to the nation, blah, blah, blah. You know the story. But in the early 20th century, they began to be looked at with demonizing eyes as sites of climate destruction and obsolete production. And now the work really lies in defining what these monuments to a past era will come to mean for our future.
Right. I kind of got into this in an earlier segment, but what has become of these sites is really controversial, obviously. I guess while the South Cooling Tower case definitely falls in this conversation, it's different, and it's because it's special in terms of what it has become for ORFU students. The university seems to see it as an eyesore and a perfect location for campus renewal. They seem reluctant to accept that a kind of unplanned space can be the venue for arguably the richest social and cultural interactions on campus. Giannis, what do you think?
Yeah, Ricky, for me, it's really about expanding access to free education. Since or if you first opened in 2038, the emphasis has been on continuing to broaden access to tools that give people from this community an opportunity to grow in the most cutting edge fields. So, or if you success in the 40s was extremely beneficial to the region and nearby towns, Cheshire being a prime example, right? But we need more space. And ORFU has over 80,000 applicants a year, and it's only able to accept roughly 9,000 of those because of the limited space. So our school was never meant to be one of these Ivy League institutions, only available to a select few. So for me, and I think for everybody, the focus should be on building upon ORFU's legacy, doing what is needed to admit more students and hire more faculty and really grow this amazing institution.
It's a great point. Allegra, there's kind of no denying that the need to expand facilities in some manner, right? You know what the labs look like.
Yeah, absolutely, Ricky. But I think there's a lot of ways to do this. There are so many empty fields and lawns and forests around our campus. The school could easily expand there. It would honestly even be cheaper to build new buildings instead of going through all the trouble to reuse a nearly 100-year-old structure.
Yeah, protecting and preserving the spaces that are culturally and socially significant is vital. I totally agree with that. But the grounds around campus are not simply used as land, and there are massive systems of fields dedicated to agri-scientific research and family-owned production. Also, the riverfront access, the observation point walking trails, the community recreation center are fundamental spaces and not just for ORFU. Sure, at one point the power plant gave this community jobs and power, but the land is what brought the community back to life, right? So, what's really worth preserving here?
Mhm. For our listeners who aren't familiar with ORFU, the campus currently operates almost entirely within the buildings of the former Gavin Power Plant. We're sitting here surrounded by old turbines the size of buildings, massive steel ducts turned into elevators, and I gotta say, it's remarkable. It makes me think about videos I've seen where these types of complexes are torn down back in the late 20s, 30s, I guess. Multiple massive structures imploded at once. People would gather around and watch with a big countdown, all that. They're really, I see them as maybe more sad now.
Yeah, Ricky, I mean, it's true.
Cooling tower
The
game.
founders of ORFU could have completely demolished the Gavin Power Plant. But instead, they really let the atmosphere of these infrastructures themselves become monuments to the identity of this whole region of the country. These spaces have borne witness to powerful moments of innovation, scrutiny, progress, and destruction. It's hard to explain, but all of that history is really embedded in the buildings on our campus. But on the other hand, and as we've discussed already today, there's a substantial difference between a considerate reuse project and an inconsiderate one.
That's true. So here's some technical info that I have. It looks like the proposed design will provide 3,000 new dormitory spaces, quote, with a variety of living types to accommodate for a broad range of prospective students. The plan also states the building would have net positive energy production. Good. So it would actually generate additional energy that could be used elsewhere on campus.
Exactly, Ricky. So there would also be hardly any changes to the visual skyline of the campus, and all of the stuff they are planning to put in there would fill up an area people cannot even access already. So it's essential empty space. I don't think the redevelopment of the cooling tower would be different from the places on the campus that, as you both say, right, are remarkable.
Yeah, but I think it has to go beyond simply maintaining visual cohesion. There's a spatial richness beyond just the physicality of these objects. Really, my main problem with the proposed project is that it seems to totally ignore and honestly even aim to erase the voices of the people and the organizations that really rely on that space as it exists now.
Yeah, I think, for instance, of the work by Jonna Luck, she has a project that documents industrial artifacts and how their forms were maintained as opposed to, being
Gemini.
melted down, which is the main practice at the time. But yeah, they were moved to new places, took on different roles, and found new uses during the Great Exchange. Her work has become a kind of comical archive of how we tried maybe a little too hard to preserve the wrong artifacts.
Well, so Allegra, it seems like you don't feel confident that the South Tower proposal will be, as you said, a thoughtful reuse project. So, as opposed to the main campus buildings, which we all seem to agree are quite beautiful, right?
Yeah, I mean, really, I'm just wary when new buildings attempt to recreate or reconstitute an atmosphere. This is a bit different than what happened with the Gavin plant. The plant was shut down, the entire complex was in danger of demolition. There was zero daily life in these buildings. If the university wants to build new spaces on campus that supposedly foster inclusion, provide outlets for creativity, and really become the center of student life, they shouldn't do it on a site that already provides that. For me, it really runs the risk of, as we've seen before, destroying an authentically rich space and attempting to synthetically recreate it, as Sean Vo would say, in a test tube.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, let's take some calls. Lots of interesting questions from our listeners right now. Let's hear from Kutan.
Thanks for taking my call, guys. Super interesting topic today. What are your thoughts about the potential of an abandoned university facility by the 80s? Are we potentially looking at a monument which signify multiple histories? Thanks again, and sorry to be a downer. I'll take my answer off the air.